Hello viewer, it's me, Father Andrew. Today I'll be dropping my review of Bendy and the Dark Revival, but before I actually get into this review I just have to say sorry if I sound like I've been eating sandpaper, I have a cold. And with that, now let's get straight into it. Starting with what I expected Dark Revival really just to be a remake of the original game using new assets and higher quality textures and models, but that's not what we got. Instead we got a completely different game altogether, set after the first game. And honestly, my expectations were completely blown out of the water by this one. Said expectations being blown out of the water by, firstly, the visuals, which are amazing compared to the first game. An example of this being that the ink demon actually looks like an actual demon design-wise rather than the walking bird poop we had in the first game. And another example being the environments, environmental objects, and various things scattered around. They all look visually better than anything the first game had. And with that, we can move on to the gameplay portion of this review. The gameplay itself is really good. I had basically no bugs, no problems with it at all, except for the final boss, in which the powers you get ended up bugging out. For some reason I couldn't use them, but apart from that, the gameplay was practically perfect. And with that, we can now move on to the story section of the review, which I'll be honest has a few small problems. One of those problems being, how the hell did Alice Angel sneak up on us in Chapter 5? Like, Audrey just has that third sip and Alice Angel just fucking manifests off to the side out of nowhere. There are a few moments like that throughout the game where things pop into existence for seemingly no reason. But apart from problems like that, the story was otherwise pretty good. I'm also glad that they made multiple references to the first game. An example of this being at the very beginning, where you have to find those items and put them on the pedestals for the ink machine. This being a reference to the first game's first chapter. When that first came out, you had these 6 pedestals in one room which you had to put things on to activate the ink machine. Of course, that was before Meatly remade Chapter 1 for the first game, along with Chapter 2 as well. And another example being around mid to late game, where Joey Drew references a movie reel that needs to be shown to Bendy to reset the cycle, which is exactly what happens at the end of the first game. Which is really good because it shows that Meatly can actually make a consistent story, which is something most big companies struggle to do these days. Mainly because they're full of people who are incompetent, and I could go on a rant about this for a while, but I'm going to skip that rant because otherwise we'd be here all day. And speaking of stories, we're going to move on to our next part of the review, and that is the characters. Starting off with the main protagonist, Audrey. I actually really like this character. She's pretty well written, and honestly, I'm glad that she's not an overpowered female character like you see in media these days. You know, the whole strong female character thing going on in Marvel movies these days. Which is another thing I could rant about for hours, so we're going to be skipping that and moving on to the next character. That being Henry Steen, the protagonist of the first game. He shows up in this game as well, and we actually get to see what he looks like, and he's also consistent with how he acted in the first game as well, which is very good. But of course there is a slight downside to Henry being there, and that is that we don't get to see him very much, and he doesn't get really much character development at all, but we do get to see him towards the end as well, which is nice because it shows a bit about him as a character. But apart from that, I just wish he was there a little bit more. And now to move on to Allison and Tom. These two don't have a particularly big role, which is slightly disappointing, but then again, it's mainly focused around Audrey, the main character, so they don't really need to be the main focus, but I still feel as if these two should have got a bit more focus and a bit more development as well, but apart from that, they're pretty much okay. And with that, we can now move on to a side character, and that being Sammy Lawrence, everyone's favourite ink demon worshipping madman, who sadly got done dirty quite badly. He's only used twice, and I honestly expected more of him, but I'm quite disappointed that he didn't show up more, but then again, the rest of the game makes up for it, so whatever. Moving on to the next character, I would talk about Alice Angel, but unfortunately there's nothing to talk about, so I'm just going to skip past her entirely. And move straight on to Wilson, because Alice Angel is just the same personality-wise as she was in the first game. She's still a cruel, psychopathic narcissist obsessed with making herself beautiful. Anyway, moving on to Wilson. From a story standpoint, he's very well done. But sadly, Wilson is quite predictable. I honestly, from the beginning, had a feeling that everything he said was going to be bullshit, especially with the fact that the ink demon, which he claimed was dead, was still running around. and it's because of that, the actual twist at the end doesn't hit as hard as it should, despite the attempts to make him look more valid. But apart from that, his actual past and his motives are actually quite interesting. Mainly because it shows the kind of mindset Wilson has as an antagonist, but I'm not going to be sitting here deep diving this because we got to get on with the review. Anyway, moving on to the next section, going to be talking about the bugs and glitches I experienced, which were actually very few. First one being the powers being broken in the boss fight, as I mentioned earlier. We're going to be skipping that one and continuing because I don't want to repeat myself. Another bug I encountered being with the Keeper enemies in Chapter 4, specifically a singular Keeper enemy in the checkpoint area. There is a gent pipe recharge thing at the end of the hallway, and in that hallway is also a chair on the left side. If you stand next to that chair and the Keeper comes down the hallway from the gent pipe recharge and attacks you and kills you in a very specific way, he'll clip into the chair and get stuck. The only way to fix this bug is to save and reload, which gets him out of the chair, and I honestly don't understand how this bug got left in the game, but it's not that bad. Anyway, moving on to the next problem. That being occasional strange visual issues like ink blots floating in the air, which I think may be where an asset was accidentally placed during development, but apart from that, that's the only actual bugs this game has. And with that, we can now move on to the next section of the review, and that being replay value, which is something this game has a lot of. There's 3 different endings and many different achievements that require a full playthrough to do, such as the self-discovery achievement in which you have to find all the memory items, and there's a secret ending for getting all the Illusion of Living books. So yeah, there's a good bit of replay value. And that brings us on to the second to last piece of the review. That being, is this game worth the money? I'm gonna say yes, it is indeed worth the price. And with that, we can now get on to the final part of the review, and that is, sadly, addressing the Meatly drama. I didn't want to have to do this in the review, but I'm gonna have to. Mainly because the Meatly drama actually had a massive effect on the game's development. An example of this being the claims of Meatly apparently stealing from Bioshock. I mean, I can see cues from the Bioshock aesthetic, definitely, but I don't see anything actually being stolen. And yeah, you could say that the Wilson posters are stolen, but no, they're a completely different art style of a different character for a completely different type of story. The only thing similar is surface level similarities, there's nothing beyond that. And also the constant bashing Meatly got for having to fire all of his employees when Kindly Beast was a thing. That being mainly because the company collapsed due to him having a distinct lack of management skills. But it's very clear Meatly has learned from this. Mainly because, unlike what happened at Kindly Beast where he had 50 people he could barely manage, he's gone for a smaller development team that he can actually organise more effectively. Which shows that Meatly is clearly aware of what went wrong and has taken the steps to actually rectify it. And anyway, with that, that's the Meatly drama section over, and that actually brings us to the end of the review. But before you go, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to sit down and listen to my thoughts on this game. And yes, I know my voice is absolute garbage. It's the reason on my main channel I have my friend voice act all my scripts for me. Anyway, that's it. See you next time. If you like this, give a like, share, subscribe, and also turn on the notifications to be full notifications. Alright, bye.